Today we'll be talking about how to deliver great CX without sacrificing communication security. I'm excited to be talking to everybody here today, and I'm very excited to have Sorel with me. He brings a wealth of knowledge to this presentation. And Sorel, you want to give us just that brief background about yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. Sorel Slaymaker. I am an analyst that's been covering unified communications for a couple decades now. And my focus over the last 5 years has been primarily on unified communication security and everything that goes into security, privacy, compliance, and making it easy to use and consume.
Thanks a lot. That's great. And I'm Adam Kavadi, GM, SVP Customer Experience, been here at Bandwidth for about 6 years, and really excited today to help guide this conversation as we talk a bit about security and communications, the implications on CX and more. So let's go ahead and dive right in. So today, it's important as we look at that, we think about financial technologies and how they've become increasingly ubiquitous in our everyday financial activities. And the need for data security across platforms has risen dramatically. And, fintech firms must protect sensitive personal data and privacy for their clients and improve control over the data. At the same time, we have to balance that with their customers' needs and their employees' needs for convenience and deliver easy, frictionless experience. And to that end, today we'll be going over how security impacts your CX strategy and ways to balance across those things, both, CX and security. Strategies for maintaining security and reliability if you're considering things like cloud migration, which is pretty common in this day and age, and ways to delight your customers and build a best-in-brand experience. So let's go ahead and dive right into that. Sorel?
Thanks, Adam. So security is becoming everyone's concern, and every project and everything that we do has to have a security component. That's just the reality of the age that we live in. And we have to do it in a way that maintains the organizational brand, that makes sure it's easy for everyone, but it definitely has to be there in the background because we face all types of challenges. There's ransomware that's out there and on the rise. Every day we get fraudulent or spoofed calls, even those in the same area code and in XX that we live in. There are things that dial us and send us instant messages that are not relevant, especially during this election season. We get the social engineering and the phishing, and those are becoming more and more targeted. I got one the other day that I thought was for my mom, but looking a little closer, they had just grabbed my mom's picture, put it in as part of the phishing attempt. But it's amazing how sophisticated they're getting.
Wow.
And then lastly, compromised credentials. More and more organizations get breached. And if we're not good stewards of our own passwords, our passwords that were used on the one site are now the passwords that are used on some of our other sites or similar enough that hackers and malicious individuals or groups can take advantage of them. So remember, customer experience is important and security is everyone's problem/solution, and we all have to be aware of it. More and more, as we look at all the things that can happen to an organization, whether it's a natural disaster, hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, droughts, what have you, whether it's business interruptions in the supply chain. From this Allianz study, it really highlighted that at the top of all the things that can interrupt your business, cyber incidents are number one. That wasn't the case a couple of years ago. It's becoming more and more the case as ransomware continues to grow, and you have malicious organizations out there continuing to derive ways to be able to impact a business, especially a lot of the small and medium businesses getting impacted by ransomware because they don't have the security controls and processes in place. And every time, an event occurs, it costs everybody money. It's a big disruption to organizations, especially if they're feeding larger organizations like a supply chain partner for a car manufacturer. And the cost of it is also very impactful. So like one of our data points here is $1 fraud costs U.S. financial services $4. And so this is why a lot of organizations are saying that hey, we need to invest more in this. And then lastly, you know, 80% of customers will defect if their information is compromised in a security breach. This is a powerful stat and just reminds us that no matter what job we're in the building of the brand, the customer experience of the organization, that if we don't do our job well, that it will have a big negative impact to the organization as a whole. So as I mentioned, you know, trust is critical. You know, we talk about zero trust, managed trust, but the key point is we have to build that trust with an organizational's customer base, partners, employees, and that it's the expectation that when organizations build applications, when they have, you know, IVR applications to receive calls, to dial out calls, that they have the privacy and security controls in place to make sure that they are protecting you, their customer. And a lot of customers, so one of our stats here is 74% of customers expect more from their brands that they trust. You know, that part of the brand is trusting that you are looking out for them. And as said earlier, 80+% of your organization can lose its customer base if you are breached or if you do something messy. And it's the worst type of news. I mean, if your organization's, you know, making the 5 o'clock news because of breaches or other improper security controls or processes, it's never good.
All right, now we'll jump into talking a little bit about security then, now that we've laid the groundwork for understanding the kind of background of the threat space.
So security in the unified communications field is really challenging and has a lot of unique requirements. You know, the first thing is users are everywhere. They're at home, offices, mobile, and they've got different profiles. They can be, you know, sometimes your users are your internal employees. Sometimes they're your customers. Sometimes there's somebody you want to make a customer. They're just everywhere. It's not like you've got just servers in a Amazon or your own data center to protect. You are having to protect users that have can be anywhere with any device. And then the second portion of that makes this really tricky is all the privacy regulations, you know, confidentiality regulations, both in the U.S. to some specific states like California, and across the globe, you know, to Europe and GDPR and all those requirements. And a lot of this communications, you have different requirements. If it's interactive communications versus voice and what you do with that, or videos. You know, you're not allowed to post or share videos on social media in many cases unless you have, you know, people's prior consent. So those type of laws you have to be aware of. And then a lot of these tools also have the ability to provide remote control, which is very powerful if IT is helping you troubleshoot your device. But that's also a backdoor that can be maliciously taken advantage of. So those have to be controlled and make sure that the right logging in and access controls are in place to make sure that's secure. Then on the right-hand side, we talk a little bit about the unique technology. So as many of you know that, you know, unlike web, which is, you know, pretty much all HTTPL, we've got our SIP signaling. We've got UDP, which is a slightly less secure protocol than TCP. It's bi-directional and it's time sensitive. And that time sensitive, you know, we at No Jitter are proud of, is that you really can't have much jitter in your communications, otherwise the packets drop. And that's important because if you're going through firewalls or other things that have a big CPU spike, you can't slow down that voice traffic. So technology-wise, there's also challenges here. The user experience, you know, just like with anything else, users gravitate towards what is easy. So if you make your organization's, whether it's internal, external communications solutions too complex, they'll gravitate to something else. They'll start using their own private Zoom accounts for business and other things that will bypass your organization's security and privacy policies. And lastly is we all have to deal with spoofing, making sure that when we're calling out to the customer, they know it's your organization with a secured caller ID, that you have the option when required for voice authentication, that caller ID can be trusted, that a stolen device can be identified, and make sure that you add additional security controls when that user is not doing something they normally do. So wrap all these things together, and what do you have? A lot of complexity and challenges, which we're here to talk about today and help you solve.
Yeah, that is a lot for people to solve. There's a lot of different areas there, and you really need a framework to be able to attack something as vast and varied as all those things that you just laid out, Sorrel. So what we want to talk about here today is this framework, if you will, of trying to strike a balance and make sure that you cover the appropriate areas. And as we look at this framework of prevention, detection, and response, it's pretty straightforward. Prevention is clearly it's the front door. We want to try to stop things up front, but the surface area here is so broad, and we're going to dive into each of these and understand them better. Our strategy has to assume that it's not a question of if, but when, right? We have a good number of folks on this call today. I would wager that, that more than one of us watching today have some kind of active infiltration or DDoS or other attack going on, whether or not we're aware of it, right? And as unfortunate as that is, it means that the other aspects of this, detection and response, are equally important, right? And we have to have these things thought through and planned out ahead of time, with appropriate levels of effort and accuracy and things like that, in order to make sure that we're not left in a bad position after the dust settles, right? So let's dive in a little bit and understand this a little better. Go ahead, Sorrel.
Yeah, so as you think about your journey, and security is always a journey on, improving your communication, security, and privacy, here's a framework that I've put together to help organizations move up, so that, you might have consumer grade technology today that we all use with our personal devices, into the enterprise grade solution that a lot of the organizations and vendors that sell into enterprises have today. But many of these solutions, you have to either go out and buy net new, or you look to partners like Bandwidth to help augment those existing systems to get to that top grade, what we're calling the ultra grade, which is providing all the security and privacy controls that your organization is going to need to make sure that those critical interactions is as secure and private as they need to be for your business to succeed and for your customers to continue to have your trust. So the first area is identity. So an identity is not only used in some type of directory and stuff like that, but moving up into multi-factor authentication, types of one-time passwords, adding additional controls around time, location, because location, every location in the world has a unique RF signature. So you can use IP addresses, you can use SSIDs, other types of things to be able to identify that, hey, this person who put in this username and password has these additional security controls, we're like 99.9999% sure that they are who they say they are, and that you have that level of granularity. The second characteristic is in the network tier, that you have a network that's based on zero trust, that no matter if it's a private network, a public network, a mobile network, that it's zero trust and encrypted end to end. And that you're not only encrypting the network end to end, but going into the next characteristic, that encryption is per session, per message. So I'm doing different levels of encryption of my voice versus my chats that I might be sending back versus my documents. And that as you continue to mature, many organizations are also bringing their own key. So that even though they're using a third party or a cloud provider, because they are managing those encryption keys, they can be ensured that they really control who can see and view the messages. The next characteristic is devices that are used. As you use your personal device or your managed the device that your organization gets, when you really need the ultra secure, ultra grade level of security, being able to lock down those devices so that people can't put malware or spyware on your device. Having proxies to be able to add watermarks and classifications of your data and controlling what the data is going in and out and who can see what. And last characteristic is AI, the ability to use artificial intelligence to be able to ferret out those anomalies, because you've got all this data coming in, all these users, all these calls going on, and you need an automated way of saying, hey, this is something that needs to be looked at, because if there's malware out there, if there's bad actors, you need something that's going to create a red light and say, hey, we're going to need someone to look at this, and if it is serious, to immediately, in real time, address it and mitigate it.
That's great. Yeah. And I love that you described this as a journey. There's a lot. I mean, but generally the goal here is to move yourself up on many of these axes, but you're going to find that depending on the systems you're protecting and the environment you're in, as we talked about before, there is a balance here between the user convenience and the level of security required for the data or the situation. On the upside, more and more of these tools are enabling lower friction capabilities and making it easy to provide these higher levels, getting yourself up to ultra grade whenever possible without impacting your users in a negative way, which is huge. And one of those areas that's becoming more and more common and spidering out beyond even the network is the zero trust security approach. So we want to take a minute to dive into this. And this is one of these ultra grade high-end methodologies, and we're seeing it flow more and more into enterprises day by day, especially as we look at these high risk areas like finance and government type areas, things like that. There's a lot of value here to be brought in. And the general ideology around zero trust is that there's no more safe space. There isn't an area, say, in your network where you can trust that anybody who's in there is who they say they are and should be there. And so you have to filter in and layer on additional levels of security. And it is a better approach because we have found time and time again that any safe space can be infiltrated at some point in time. And if all your boundaries are down within that area, then it's very problematic. The cleanup can be difficult. The time you spend afterwards trying to understand the impact can be very difficult because there may not be audit logs or traceability in terms of what happened inside your network. So some characteristics of what we start to see in these zero trust approaches is things like implementation of two-factor or multi-factor authentication, even after an initial layer of security has been passed. So, for example, on a financial system, transfer of a large sum of money beyond a certain threshold might incur an additional multi-factor authentication challenge, right? So it's introducing this additional friction. We also see things like layering on multiple layers, some obtrusive, some not, like voice biometrics. So if you have a call with, say, an IVR, people can call in, maybe work their way through and talk to an agent. While they're talking, voice biometrics can be running. That can then identify the person positively or not. If they are identified positively, you can apply lower levels of friction. Maybe not asking all of the verification questions. If it fails, maybe you go for more layers and then force a 2FA or something like that. So here's a good example where you can layer on these different items and help to make sure that you're not just trusting because someone's passed one level, that you're not going to apply additional levels. And as we look at this, we see more and more, as Terrell said, more and more people using devices to access different applications or networks, and making sure that you can trust those devices, that can validate who they are. It's an important part of making sure that you're always trying to validate and trust who they are, that you're not going to just assume once they're in that they're safe. And then ultimately, you want to be able to apply the appropriate level of access. And this is an important aspect of zero trust, is that even if you know who they are, it doesn't mean they're allowed to do everything. Every person has the right level of access that should be granted, especially for what they're trying to accomplish. You can even do things like, based on a certain level of access granted at this time, they have certain capabilities. So it's important to kind of be able to set that up right, and then have the right tools to allow you to give those permissions, to audit those permissions, and be able to change them over time to make sure that they're accurate. And you can do things, as I think was said earlier, Cheryl said, around location. Based on the location a person is accessing from, you can increase how much verification you require or limit their capabilities in terms of what they can do because they're not that they're in a questionable location or something that's been different than before. So you have a lot of flexibility in how you can apply that. And this all kind of circles around this idea of this zero trust. So now if we've gone ahead and we've done what we feel is we've made progress on our journey in terms of the prevention front, we need to make sure that we are still planning and thinking about detection, right? You've got these multiple aspects, these different axes that you're working on. And something to think about with detection is that, the people trying to get into your systems, they're always evolving their methods. They're looking at new 0 days. They're buying access to credentials and other information for phishing or smishing or all these other types of methods to get through the human element, which is always a dangerous area. So you have to always be evolving your protocols and your methodologies as well, right? And as you look at different types of specialty equipment or areas like communications, they may have different vectors and different attack paths that people come in through. And oftentimes they're very specialized to the specific fields that those things are. And we've seen this specifically at Bandwidth. We've certainly seen this in the communication space, and we've become experts in the telecom industry. We understand the evolution that it's taken over the last 50 years and understand where those weaknesses are, how they can be taken advantage of, and how you can harden against them. And that's important because we still have a lot of people who run a lot of on-premise equipment that they don't really fully understand. Even if they're making efforts to patch the vulnerabilities and whatnot, they may not understand at a fundamental level where there's weaknesses that are there or the subtleties and nuance that can really lead to those. So it's important that you can lean on your vendors to help you with the aspects of detection and prevention in those spaces. And remember that just because you purchase one tool that's supposed to help with detection, that's not necessarily going to cover everything. Just like in the prevention space, we talk about kind of layering on the different levels for different areas. You may need to leverage multiple different fronts of detection so that you can cover different types of things that may happen, right? And so it's important, whether that be through security vendors or your vendors you're working with and other aspects, it's important to be thinking about how you can gain that protection from different groups. The last thing here on detection is that, or one of the things here is that you have to be looking at being flexible about how you look at things. We've seen increasing growth in smishing, which is the SMS phishing, and vishing with a V, which is voice phishing. And those attacks can be highly automated. And we've seen a spate of them even this year recently. They've gotten very aggressive with it. And it can be difficult to track those kinds of things. You have to have a good handle on things like access patterns and things like that to be able to look for when those attacks can be successful. So it's important to be able to kind of watch for those. So at the end of the day, automation in some of these areas can be key in terms of keeping up with new threats and helping to identify when they're successful. And so you want to be looking ahead of time because you can't set up automation in the middle of the attack, right? So these are things where preparation, much like on the prevention side, is very important when you're looking at detection. So let's talk a little bit about response, right? Again, as I said before, it's not if, but when. You need to be planning for the when and what you might do when it happens. And the best way to really reduce the impact of any of these events is to have a plan and be ready to implement that plan quickly. Because you may catch an intrusion or some other event while it's happening and be able to halt it before a lot of damage is done. And that's massively important because if you're slow to respond or you don't even notice at all, then that incident can become far worse and ripple out beyond where it could have been stopped. Now, there's a lot of aspects to this, right, to the response. Part of it is the immediate thwarting, whether that means you need to shut down systems, segregate out networks and things like that. And so this is why you want to have drills, you want to have preparation, you want to be reviewing with your teams on what you can do, what kind of activities should take place. Internal communications is really important. Who's going to be involved in a stakeholder? Who's going to be informed so they can be aware? How are you going to talk to your customers about this? When should they be informed? What should you tell them? Sometimes, in a hope to be transparent and to keep customers informed, you can overshare and actually tip tip hand to help out the hackers, things like that. So you have to be kind of thoughtful about what you say. Obviously, you don't want to incite any fear in your customers if something dark to happen, but you want to keep them informed so they understand what actions they should take or shouldn't take to be a good kind of citizen during this event, right? But your goal here, right, is to contain the incident and prevent further damage, and then start to speed along the process of recovery and cleanup, right? That's really important. Afterwards, you want to make sure that you do your thorough review. How did they get in? What can we how do we remediate this? What kind of changes do we need to make immediately? What kind of process changes do we need to make? It's just really important that the response isn't about necessarily just stopping the hack, just doing the communication. There's a lot of follow-up that needs to take place to make sure that afterwards you become stronger and better than you were before. As some of you may be aware, in the telecommunications space over the last year has become a big target for DDoS. And we've seen that happen quite a bit. We actually saw it happening globally in last fall, and we started to prepare, double looking again at our IP systems, at our what surfaces we expose and don't expose, and we actually updated our action plans and prepared our teams and kind of reviewed things. And it was a very good thing we did that, because we got hit with a very hard DDoS attack. And it was certainly a challenge at times, but we learned a lot, and we brought a lot of our vendors along with us in resolving that. And that was critical that we were prepared for this, and the teams knew how to respond. They knew how to bring everybody to bear at the right time. And that's critically important. And so you can never prepare enough for this stuff. If you haven't spent a lot of time on it, then it's going to be really hard if something happens, and that can be tough. All right. So one area that we've actually seen things like this come up a lot is when people move to the cloud, because they have a lot of questions, right? They've historically been managing some of these systems internally. And from a communication space, that can be things like they've got specific firewalls and SBCs and interconnects set up. They feel like they're set up pretty well from a security perspective. And if you remember back to what we just talked about, it's not always the case, right? A lot of times there's aspects of the systems that they don't fully understand, whether it be being able to handle the load of something like a DDoS, or just having all the right patches in place and the right areas stitched up. So it's a very specialized type of system. And if you don't have experts who spent years and years managing those systems in a commercial scale, you may not be ready to really be up to what's required to completely secure that. So there's some benefits of outsourcing these non-core competencies to the experts, right? You're reducing the internal surface area in which your organization can be attacked. It's something that we've definitely seen is that, I remember years ago, there was an attack on Target, the retail firm. They got in through the HVAC system. So, there's a lot of things. You probably can't move your HVAC system entirely to the cloud, but if there's a specialized surface area that you aren't experts in, it can be helpful to remove as much of that from your own surface area as possible to reduce risk, right? And by doing so, oftentimes you end up with a higher level of resiliency, redundancy, and security, and a better ability to scale. And something that we've talked about a little bit here as well, but things like global capabilities oftentimes bring with them regional compliance, privacy, obfuscation, et cetera. And those are things that bring an excessive burden on an organization if it's not something they're already solving for in that particular domain. So there's definitely some benefits there around trying to move some of those burdens off of you and onto another provider. And so as you look at that, if you're considering saying, okay, we've got some on-premise solutions that we want to migrate up to the cloud, there's a few steps that we always recommend, having done this quite a few times. And the first one being planning. I mean, it sounds silly, but obviously you want to plan for a move, but planning has a lot of steps to it. Things like understanding your existing infrastructure, understanding all the little caveats that might have been set up over the years. When we're talking about phone systems, what providers have you used to acquire numbers? How are they configured? In what locations and countries and regions? What changes have you always wanted to make? Really getting those things all set up front and discussing them with your vendor to understand, because those will have implications on the experience of your users during the migration, as well as how it's set up and configured and how secure you can get that all to be. Make sure that you're interactively testing up front. This is going to be really helpful, because as you're trying to get, different types of media or connectivity through firewalls and interconnects and things like that, you're going to run into issues. So you want to make sure that you have ample time up front to test all those configurations out. And in doing so, that you're setting up and testing your performance monitoring as well, so that you understand what's working and what's not. Your vendors can oftentimes help you with that. At the end of the day, obviously, you're going to have to go through some security review, but you're going to want to make sure that you've got your pen tests and everything done, and that you're happy with the types of interconnects and whatnot you have going on to really bring the right level of security, as well as the right level of compliance for your organization in terms of privacy. Maybe it involves GDPR, SHREMS, and other areas that you want to make sure are fully secure. And at the end of the day, there's always some interesting aspects of moving to an on-prem system, whether it's communications or otherwise, that will change. If it was on-prem, you may have historically had access to log data or other types of exports or other types of artifacts that are created by those systems. And you want to make sure that you still have access to those and that they can still be integrated with your other processes that they might have been integrated with. And that, at the end of the day, you feel good about where your system is and how it's set up and how secure it is. And there's always going to be some little things you miss, but it's important. The more of this planning and upfront testing that you do, the less of those snags that you're going to hit when you're running through and going ahead to do that implementation. All right, so we've talked a lot here about some of the security aspects and then kind of a framework for how that you can manage that security, the detection and the prevention, detection, and response. And let's talk a little bit here about, as we try to consider the much more customer experience side of this.
Good stuff, Adam. So here we come to this area where you have to balance things. So you got to balance convenience, security, and privacy. And what's that right mix? One thing I like about architecture, and I've been doing IT architecture for a long period of time, is you're having to build systems that have competing requirements. And so you got to manage and find out the right balance. On the convenience side, being able to allow users to have any device, to be anywhere, to be able to just hit a single button to join, transfer, do whatever they need to do, and that the user interface is intuitive and that anybody can use it. So those are all things that, these UX experts are really good at. And then you turn around and balance that with security so that, you're getting the authorization and authentication that you need, that you're making sure everything's encrypted, that you're following all the certifications that are out there, and that you have the security and threat monitoring infrastructure and logging and alerting in place. And that when you're having to go to multi-factor authentication or adding additional levels of authentication and authorization, that you're doing so and not yet violating that convenience model. And then our third part of this circle here is the privacy. So making sure that based on the region that the person is calling from, because again, a lot of times these rules are where they're geographically at, not what their home nationality is. Or it can be vice versa. So it could be their nationality, but yet they're from Europe, but they're here in the U.S. So you got to be able to make sure that you got all your privacy controls in place, that you understand that, rules for what you keep, what you store, how long you store it, whether it can go out of country, out of your cloud and get processed for billing, other things, that all that regionalization, and regulations are followed. And that's one of the nice things about, when you go to cloud providers is that's what they're set up to do. They got the global infrastructure and they're aware of all these controls to be able to do that so that they can meet those, in-country or regional requirements. And then to put all this together, Adam.
I think we're just making sure. There we go.
Sorry. Okay. Oh, sorry. I had some background noise there. I think that ultimately you want your vendors to be supporting you on this journey, right? You need to make sure that you've got the ability to have them in there helping to bring consistency, helping to monitor what's going on, and make sure that, you're looking for any kind of anomalous behavior in their systems or things like that, that their policies are, whether they be around security or retention or around privacy, that they are in line with the policies that you as a company have to bring to bear, right? And then, as I said, we circle back around to convenience again, because as you said earlier, Sorrel, and I completely agree, if things provide too much friction, they'll oftentimes try to find ways around them. And we don't want to do that, right? It's critical that our customers are able to be compliant, whether those customers be internal or external, with our policies that are in place. So it's important that we continue to keep that in mind, to iterate and to talk about that as an aspect of our security and our privacy, that the user experience play a significant role in that, because we want to encourage them to take part in the program, because security and privacy are really all of our concerns, not just those creating the policies, but those living with them every day. So when we talk about, building this kind of a best-in-class brand experience, it's all that we've been saying here, minimizing that friction, getting to the right level of security on that beautiful graph that we looked at earlier, of all the kind of different types of security that you can bring to bear. It's important that the security and privacy framework works for you and hits those right levels, that you're layering that security, sometimes multiple layers. Some of them are visible, some of them are invisible, right? And as you look at things like making use of technology that can make it easy for those invisible ones to take on more and more of the burden, because it's less intrusive for the customer, right? And then as you do that, we talked about kind of moving to the cloud to consolidate your tech stack, reduce complexity, bring more consistency across things, and offload some of the risk that your company doesn't need to bear to other organizations that can specialize in it, which can increase your level of security and reduce the complexity that you have to manage. And ultimately, all of that can lead to things being a little bit easier for you and a lot easier for your users as well, which ultimately can lead to just less risk and a better experience. Now, obviously, I feel that Bandwidth is a great company to work with in this kind of a journey. We're here to help with cloud communications. As adoption grows and complexity of the world and all the partners and those involved continues to grow as well, and to really at exponential rates, you want to make sure that you're working with someone who works with those partners directly, who has years of experience, who understands security and scale at a global level. And those are hugely important. So as you consider who you want to build, what stack, what cloud vendor you want to base your experience on, and you want to grow with you and bet on in the future, we definitely love for you to consider doing that with Bandwidth, and happy to be a part of that journey with you. And in light of that, I'd like to talk for a moment about a customer of ours that did embark on this in the last year with us. This is a Fortune 100 financial services company, a leader in credit cards and other spaces. And they had a real challenge in that they had a legacy toll-free voice network that they were leveraging that presented a single point of failure. And that's always a little scary. Whether it be to outage it, just general outage, or an attack of some source or another, it can really lead to this choke point that can be problematic and potentially downtime and inaccessibility for your customers. And on top of that solution was not easily to interop, and it was slow to evolve and meet their needs. And that means that they can't grow and change providers, that they can't update with times with respect to regulations or growing security threats and things like that. So they were really looking for someone who could be more flexible and powerful. And as they grew and then tried to improve the experience for their customers, they needed a partner who would do that with them. We were happy to come along and do that and enable our adaptable cloud solution, our network, which is programmable and very flexible, and it gave them access to resiliency. So they were able to easily use multiple different conversational AI vendors to be able to try them out and switch them out easily, which gave them flexibility in case of outages or problems with one of the vendors, or even be able to figure out which one provided a better experience for their customers. They had more flexibility around that. It also allowed them to bring in voice biometric capability at the network level. And this was fantastic because it provided that extra layer of hidden security for their customers to be able to reduce friction on some calls where they're able to positively identify people with voice biometrics. And so that reduced the effort on the agents, increased the satisfaction of the customers. And ultimately now they've passed over 1 billion minutes on our network and have a much improved, seamless, and secure customer experience. And so they're happy to work with us, and we're very excited to help them deliver that to their customers. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for all the time today listening to us. We're going to be opening this up to question and answer now. And we're happy to kind of take your questions and see if there's anything else that we can help you with, or more areas that we can dive into that maybe you had some questions about from the conversation. And thank you, Sorrel, for taking the time to discuss this with me.
Okay. Well, thank you, Adam, and thanks, Sorrel, also. And we'll go right to Q&A, and since it touches on the slide you just had, Adam, and it's a pretty quick question. First one I want to ask is, someone's asking about the example that you gave us. Was that toll-free network U.S. only, or was it global?
I believe in that case there, the toll-free network was U.S. only. But the customer, I believe, does have some global as well, and we're happy to help in those scenarios too. But in that case, I believe there was a good few numbers that were U.S. toll-free.
Would there be, if you kind of peel back on that, what would be the kind of different challenges? And I'll throw this to both of you, in global versus just a U.S. only deployment.
Sure, I can start with a little bit of that. One of the issues that we have in general with toll-free, but we definitely have even more so at times, can be fraud. And so you want to make sure that you're working with a provider that can help you with fraud detection and mitigation, because the costs for toll-free, especially on the international stage, can be a bit higher. You want to make sure that you have the tools in place for things like spend alerts and things like that can help you to set up thresholds that are realistic for your business and help you to quickly react. And work with your vendor to mitigate those when they should happen.
And one thing I'll add to it is, so much of our past has been, toll-free, communicating with people real time, especially when critical events occur, like you lose your credit card. But more and more, the chat channel is becoming that universal customer service. And, with the advantages of services like bandwidth, you can be elastic and you can add, chat capability, chatbot capability, language translation. There's so much that you can do in the written medium choice along with the voice choice. And so when you do mix that, you need somebody that can be in the middle, that can be between your enterprise and all the different regions of the world and the different other additional service providers that provide additional software as a service values, such as whether it's authentication, whether it's translation, whether it's recording, which bandwidth does natively, or other services. That flexibility and that ability to be elastic, to spin up, spin down based on the time of year, like if you're a retailer, is all very powerful for these enterprises out there.
Yeah, certainly. And I'll mention as well, since you brought that up, you're talking about things like integrating with maybe a mobile app to bring a chat capability or something like that. You also can look at leveraging WebRTC, which is basically can be audio or video, but digitally native, and interop that with existing telephony, say a contact center, without having to make major changes to your contact center. So those are kind of capabilities that we can also help with.
All right. Well, thanks very much. Let's move on to our next question. This person is asking, sees obviously the benefit and the applicability of multi-factor authentication when you're dealing with humans, but how can this be done, or can it be done when you're doing sort of machine-to-machine communications, and how do you layer in more security in that kind of a scenario?
A lot of the machine-to-machine communication these days is really APIs. And so you end up having a whole security and framework around API security. And so both Adam and I could do a whole other presentation on API security, because Bandwidth has their own APIs that they offer and provide security services around. But that's a great question, and API security is a big portion of how this business-to-business, machine-to-machine communication is going on in the back end, like I'm searching as a customer representative, searching for where your inventory is or where it's going to be delivered, having to go out to the delivery partner website to see that. So yeah, API security is part of that overall equation. Adam?
Yeah, thanks, Earl. Yeah, I agree, definitely. And I think as you look at strategy in this place, oftentimes you have things like there's, again, layers of security. So the first one can be things like, using your token-based authentication, rotating those tokens over time. Additionally, looking at systems like bandwidth and many others that allow you to limit the scope of capability of an API token. So, is this token able to do certain things and not do other things? And then that way, you don't have to say if a token's compromised, it doesn't mean they get full access to the system that you're trying to manage, or that you have the capability to work into. And so I think it's about kind of that zero trust of reducing the blast radius and limiting capabilities.
Okay. Moving on. Yeah, here's another question. I think it's a great, just sort of level setting question. What do each of you think is the biggest threat that companies aren't prepared for today? And maybe Adam, I'll start with you on that.
Yeah, that's a good question. I will say this one isn't really a surprise, but it's probably still true, which is the human side of things. The social aspect of this is the biggest hole in security. I know that at Bandwidth, we do quite a few of these fake phishing attempts and smishing attempts and things like that to try to train people and prepare them for what to look for. And there was a pretty massive campaign of that of smishing earlier this year that caused quite a few hacks. Luckily, Bandwidth, while we did actually see people within our organization targeted, we were not compromised from it because we had a security team that had already been practicing these things, was actually monitoring as soon as it happened, was able to take preventative measures as well. So it's one that folks are not necessarily unaware of, but they are probably still the least prepared for because it's so difficult. And it spans the gamut of smishing, phishing, so those voice-based attacks. You also have like business email compromise where folks will be emailed and told, oh, here's your new, account number that you should be depositing your payments into. Your customers maybe sent something like that. And now they're sending money off to someone else. So it's one that's difficult because it evolves so much and it preys on people's willingness to be helpful. And when they're told, oh, reset your password, and they go ahead and do it because I was told to reset my password. I didn't know it was a fake site. And so additional technologies, and education are really, and constant education are really big parts of solving that. And that takes some rigor that not everybody has really devoted to security yet. So, Sorrel, your thoughts?
I would say that the biggest thing out there is the unknown unknown. And what do I mean by that? I was recently at a conference on a security panel, and one of my colleagues, said that when they did a survey on organizations that, have been breached, that they asked, was this breach something that you expected? Was it on a risk register? Was it something that you've identified and were working to mitigate and stuff like that? And close to 90% said, nope, we had no idea. We had no idea it was this employee. We had no idea that all of a sudden this vendor would have a backdoor into our network, or the various things that just come up there. And so I think a lot of organizations, spend a lot of time and good time and rigor around having definitive plans and securing everything, which you got to do. But the second thing you have to do is when an event happens, be prepared and be able to handle it quickly. And so that's where that elasticity comes into play, that you can be able to, this vendor got compromised. This vendor has ransomware. Oh, I now need to move all my call authentications for multi-factor over to here. You got to be able to do that. You can't rely on a single instance or person as an organization, as an institution. You've got to have that flexibility that when something is not working over here, that you can go over here to continue to support your customers in a highly available way.
Okay. And Cyril, I mean, you mentioned just recently, in your answer there, how do you think about when to notify your customers about breaches? Is there a kind of best practice in terms of when that external communication should go out? Does each enterprise kind of develop its own governance around that, or what have you seen? Maybe starting with Cyril, and as you looked at different companies.
So I've worked with a lot of organizations that, have been breached, and they'll bring me in to help them with the mitigation. But in almost every organization that I've worked with, when you have an incident, there's a whole HR and legal team that handles it, and the PR team. And so since I work primarily in the technical teams and space, I really can't say, how the PR and legal teams handle that communication with the customer, but it is something that's very formal. It's something that is legally reviewed. It's something that PR puts their wrapper on to have happened. And there's a delicate balance, as Adam mentioned earlier, on doing it at the right time. Not too early, not too late. And so what is that? And that's based on the scope and a whole bunch of other factors. So, sorry, not able to fully answer that question, but it is a good question. Adam, over to you.
Yeah, sure. I can probably throw some thoughts into it. I think you're absolutely correct that you do really want to have legal and PR involved, because you'll have folks definitely on the technical side of things who are eager to get something out, especially probably your operational support people as well, will want to inform the customers, right? Who want them to not be in the dark. They probably heard some rumors, or they've seen things acting weird, or maybe shut off because this is part of your remediation efforts and they don't know what's going on. And maybe you need them to take action too. So there may be folks on the technical and operational side who want to get in touch with the customers and talk to them, and they should, but you don't want to be rash about it. You do want to make sure that you have the review. You want to make sure that you think through, will anything we say here compromise our position further? What actions do we need them to take immediately? What's the takeaway they need to take from this? Is it that it's under control and they don't have to worry and we're going to get them post-mortem soon? Is it that the attack or the threat is ongoing and we'll get them more info, but for right now we want them to know we're actively working it? I think a big part of it is what is the outcome or the takeaway that the customer should have? Are there specific actions, and how should they, I don't want to say how should they feel, but what's the general sentiment of what you're trying to provide? I think that's really important, because this is a much emotional incident for your customers, right? Is my data secure? Is the service available? Are my customers that I'm using this for impacted? And so you want to start to answer those questions. Generally, you do want to be, you don't want to leave them hanging in the dark. They start to form their own hypotheses. They start to get scared, right? And communication is extremely important. But it is a balanced kind of thing, and every scenario is a little different. So there isn't really a blanket answer. I do think, as for some of the other stuff we talked about, preparation, maybe like a little bit of role playing and things like that can be helpful. How would we handle it if this happened? How would we handle it if that happened? What have we done in the past? Do we have any feedback from previous incidents, even if they weren't security related, on how we responded too soon or not soon enough? And you kind of have to figure that out. And also just the cultural attitude of your company will play a part in it too. Are you generally a very transparent and open organization, or are you more reserved and conservative? And that will likely play a role too. But I do think, as I was just saying, the best thing you can do is have some of these discussions beforehand. How might we respond in these cases? Because it's a lot easier to have a calm and thorough and detailed review from multiple perspectives when you're not in the heat of the moment. And then you can try to apply some of that understanding when such an event occurs.
One thing to add on to that, I think every organization should have a playbook. So what Adam's mentioning, being prepared and stuff like that, is having a ransomware or other type of incident playbook that you can refer to, because enough is going on. And if you don't have who needs to be contacted, how you're going to contact them, how you can securely communicate so you don't alert whoever might be the perpetrator. I mean, there's a whole bunch of things that come into play, and there's a whole industry and expertise around creating, building, and running these playbooks.
Okay. We got time for one more question, and it's on the password reset attack question. Somebody's asking, is spam email filtering the best way to stop hackers from getting to employees and convincing them to reset passwords in a fake site, or are there other techniques that you recommend besides spam filtering?
I can quickly say that it can help, but I would not depend upon spam filtering. Those filters oftentimes run through a number of different heuristics and ML and things like that to help run them, but they're not, designed specifically for that, and they're not terribly hard to bypass either if you work at it. So I think oftentimes the best bet is to involve secondary channels, things like MFA or 2FA when you go to perform that action. Also to make sure that you do things like send follow-ups, like your password was recently changed emails, so that should something like that occur, they're notified immediately that it did happen, and they know to expect that. And if they don't get that, they know something's up, right? So I think there are other ways. I would not depend on that as my primary. Sorrel, do you have any follow-up?
Well, what we do know is that the phishing attempts are going to get more sophisticated. And so whether it's email or it's voice or text or what have you, they're only going to get more sophisticated. So organizations will continue to need to be one step ahead. And part of, our story today is, who you partner with and how you go about approaching your customer journey for security and interactions is about being prepared and about being one step ahead, so that your organization is not at risk.